So 2022 was quite the year. The US regained all the jobs it lost during the pandemic. Inflation picked up steam. The Fed picked up interest rates. Kroger agreed to buy Albertsons. Meta lost a quarter of its market value. Then FTX collapsed. Plus, we had Will Smith slapping Chris Rock. The Queen died. Elon bought Twitter. There was a lot that happened this year. But today we want to know, what were the biggest retail stories and trends for 2022? And what trends should you be watching for in 2023? To find out, we're going to talk with Deb Weinswig. She's CEO and founder of Coresight Research. Right now, on everything we know about retail. This is the show where we tell you everything we know about retail, and we broadcast live on LinkedIn and YouTube. But you don't have to watch us live. You can watch the replay whenever you want. Go to everythingweknow.show, and it will bring you to the full archive of past shows, plus a lot of other video treats, like our recent visit. Ebere and I recently went to the House of Showfields in Brooklyn, and we posted that on that same channel. So my name is James Cook, and I'm joining you live from Indiana.
And my name is Ebere Anokute, and I'm coming live from New York.
And we both research retail and real estate for JLL. Ebere, before we get into today's show and meet our guest, I want to quickly discuss a format change for 2023 for everything we know about retail. Since we launched the show in the midst of the old 2020 pandemic, we've been going weekly. So we've been on most weeks. And what we've decided to do is give more bang and less frequency in 2023. So we're going to be doing 1 or 2 episodes a month, but we're going to be bringing on more guests, more interesting topics, more wonderful retail research jam-packed into a smaller container. So what do you think? Are we making the right move here, Ebere?
I think so, James. I feel like we're going to be able to really knock it out of the park with those shows that we do once or twice a month. So it's only going to get better from here.
Yeah. I think it gives us an opportunity, instead of doing, hey, let's just talk about whatever happened this week. It gives us an opportunity to say, hey, we're going to put together a show with a theme, with guests or guests, and really do it in depth. So with that in mind, let's get in depth with our guest today, who's Deb Weinswig. Welcome, Deb.
Thank you for having me.
So Deb is CEO and founder of Coresight Research, which is a retail research company. Deb is all over the place. I just saw you on a clip from Cheddar this morning, and I need to find out what Cheddar is. I know it's like a news thing, right? Is that like a web thing?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's almost kind of like, CNBC for millennials is kind of how I would look at it.
So Ebere, you're a millennial. Do you already know about Cheddar?
I am not familiar yet, but I'm going to get familiar now. Thanks to
He is going to be familiar in 30 minutes.
There you go.
So Deb, you're not only the founder of Coresight, but you're also on the board of directors at Primaris, Guess, Excel Brands. So you get all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, it's been interesting to really start to, and actually I'm on the board of Noggin, which is a headless commerce company. And so being able to really kind of connect the tech to the retail to the malls. And personally, I think, and I know we'll get into this, but I can't help myself, right? One of the biggest trends I think we're going to start to see next year is, right, these malls serving as platforms. So it was interesting. I think all of us take a step back to take, 2 steps forward in the new year. And we're looking at how we assign our research. And so, I'm probably going to tell you before the analysts themselves knows, but I'm like, whatever, learn on the fly. Is you start to look at, right, the person who's covering like Amazon and Zalando and, JD.com, right? They probably should be covering the malls as well, because the malls are really platforms when you start to think about it. And when you start to look at it from that perspective, the role that they serve and how they serve, it really starts to change a lot of how we think about things and also how we think about the economics.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. All right, well, let's Well, maybe that will be one of our defining trends, but let's get into it. So, Deb, let's start out with you. I want to give each of us an opportunity to say what's the one trend that defined retail for you in 2022. Deb, what do you think?
I can't stick to just one, so I have to pick two.
Okay.
Maybe three. But I'm going to start with retail media because we'd heard about it, right? We'd heard about this cookie list, cookie apocalypse, and all this. And I started to hear about it in like mid 21, and then fast forward to 22. Not only are Amazon and Walmart and Kroger all breaking out, right, the amount of retail media dollars that they're earning, but to me, actually, James, it was very interesting when you're open. I will tell you, I think the number one reason we saw the Kroger Albertsons merger was because of, right, you got to be big to get the dollars. Agreed. And so I think that we're going to see more consolidation in 23. But it is, if you think about it, going back to this kind of platform idea, right? Kroger is a platform, right? They, if you are going to sell your product either in physical or on, their digital, right? There should be a toll for that. And I think the pandemic highlighted that in a way that not only gave permission, changed the way that C-suites think, and now we have the technology to do that as well. And so I think, retail media is number one. And I actually think it completely changes the economics of retail. Secondly, as you know, my favorite is live streaming. We not only saw many more live streaming platforms, right, come to life, but we've now started to see, it's fascinating, how Poshmark was acquired by a Korean company. And I will tell you, it was like overnight. It's most people are looking at TikTok. I'm watching like Poshmark live streaming because it's so good. And these people have no training. Imagine if they actually had training. And, literally, like I was on last night and the woman is like selling like damaged Lululemon product and people are paying as much for it as they would full price. But there's the way that she's approaching. It was so good. I'm like, I don't watch TV that much, but I was like, that is my entertainment. And then three, I'm sure one of you are going to jump on this anyways, but we've got to talk about the metaverse, right? Every single metaversian opportunity that retail took in 22 paid off. Every single one. And it's, the revenue that was generated not only exceeded expenses, but exceeded every ROI target of every retailer we knew. And so those are the three that, if I could mush them into one, I would try, but they're all so different. And they have all been unbelievably, I think live streaming is probably still emerging for many reasons, because I think there's almost too many platforms. I think the similarity between retail media and metaverse is that there's many fewer platforms and the path forward is much, much more well-defined, even though if you think about it, those are newer than live streaming.
So I'm going to do a metaverse follow-up question here, because you said that all the metaverse bets paid off. And I saw some that I thought kind of fizzled and others that I thought were successful. When you're talking about bets, it hasn't paid off for Meta, the company, yet, has it?
Meta's not a retailer. So
right.
I actually, so to me, let's just be very frank. Meta is not really in the metaverse. They're like Web 2.
Right.
So they're not a Web 3 company. So I have to say I've had a challenge from like day one. And, I know that the data that they espouse is like 8% of people get, kind of nauseous wearing an Oculus. I've got to tell you, every single person I've talked to, it's more like, how long can I keep it on before I get nauseous?
Really?
And so I don't think that that's the form factor of the future, right? We've seen, I'm not sure always what's in and not in the public domain, but we have seen other very large technology companies come out with almost like a Google Glass, to the point where, there are many folks who think in the not so distant future, we won't even need our phones, right? We'll be standing more upright as opposed to like losing height, looking downwards, because everything will be in this kind of perimeter. And that I think actually just makes a lot more sense in so many ways. But every retailer, right, who dropped an NFT, who tried, who sold something, you look at these, it's changed the economics for so many artists. I actually think that, to me, what's been so amazing about Web3 is we've allowed artists to get paid in their lifetime, right, for the work that they're doing. And I think that is, kind of driven out like a whole new opportunity. And I'm talking all kinds of artists. I don't care if, if you're a classical violin player or if you're, doing street art. It's everyone really has an opportunity now to monetize it. And you can literally like sell clips, right? If you're, if you're kind of composing music, you can actually sell a clip of that as an NFT, and people will then own like literally like a slice of your music. So I just think, and I think South by Southwest in 23 will be where we see truly, right, the next version of what the metaverse will mean for retail.
So interesting. All right. Well, I can't wait to see what happens next. So Ebere, what's the trend for you that defined 2022?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Deb obviously hit on so many good ones, and a lot of those were on my mind as well. But what really was top of mind for me as far as the trend that defined 2022 was the further deepening of the bifurcation of retail that we've been seeing. So this is not necessarily a brand new trend. It's something that we've been discussing, in some of our reports and our house view decks for a while. This loss of the mid-priced retailer, and I feel like in 2022 we really saw that exemplified across a number of different retail categories. When you look at some of the data, and forgive me for getting ready to share some graphs, we saw that back in 2021, discount and variety stores led new store growth, right? And this graph shows the number of new stores that were announced. And so obviously throughout 2022, they made good on some of these promises and open these stores and perhaps even announce more. But the takeaway for sure is that the discount stores were the most active retailers when it comes to opening new stores across the country. And, I know, James, we're probably going to discuss inflation a little bit later, but we have to imagine that inflation definitely sort of contributed to this, right? It made value opportunities seem really attractive to a lot of consumers that were being pressed, by prices in other categories. And so we've seen, this category expand a lot. And at the same time, we've seen luxury start to expand a lot. So we've seen luxury demand this year approach pre-pandemic levels, obviously dipped off in 2020, but it's trending back into the right direction and is forecast to surpass 2019 levels by the end of this year. A lot of that has to do with the luxury consumer base and the relative stability that they experienced throughout COVID. And that is definitely translating into new store openings, right? We've seen luxury retailers, maybe after discount and grocery, they might have been some of the most active retailers in 2022. And so what happens in this is the mid-price retailer continues to sort of disappear. When we look at the retailers that went bankrupt coming out of COVID and in the immediate months after, a lot of those were mid-priced retailers, a lot of mall heavy sort of retailers. And unfortunately, forgive the sun that's shining on me as I'm, unveiling these truths. Unfortunately, that's one of the trends that we've seen, and it hasn't really stopped, so to speak. So I feel like that mid-priced retailer going away is one of the biggest and underrated losers coming out of COVID, right? We talk about COVID being an accelerant for trends that were already in place, and the mid-priced retailer is that sort of price point seems to be disappearing rapidly. And I would also even add anecdotally that sorry, let me get rid of this. I would add anecdotally that even some of the retailers that I might have previously considered mid-priced are starting to offer more expensive items, or maybe it's inflation pushing their prices up. But I'm thinking about Banana Republic, and I wouldn't have never called them discount ever, but I wouldn't have necessarily called them luxury, right? But now when I go on there, I see items that are in the $500, $600, $700 range, and I'm just like, I thought this was Banana Republic. I feel like even within these in these retailers, they're skewing one way or the other. So that's something that I can't get my mind off of, and then I see examples of, in many different sectors, and I think really define 2022 for me.
So Ebere, can I follow up with a question to you?
Sure.
If you look at really the biggest change that we've seen in retail, right, is the growth in Shein,
Sure.
but that's not physical.
Right.
And so I would actually take the point of view, knowing many of those who have been impacted are clients of ours. So knowing it, kind of firsthand, that is a very value-oriented price point, right?
Sure.
Very fashion forward. And so I do think that, the way that the consumer is shopping is just different, right? So they are, first of all, most brands stop at, a 12. 77% of the population wears a size bigger than a 12. So they are basically I mean, these are the things that you're just like, there's a huge area of opportunity for growth. It's just offering sizes that people can wear. And that, I think, is what Shein does so incredibly well, is right. They're just much more inclusive.
For sure.
And, there's a lot that I think people who are uninformed say, but if I am now able to kind of, from a size perspective, appeal to the, kind of US population as a whole, of course I'm going to sell more, right? Of course people are going to be more loyal to me, and I can wear the looks that all my other friends are. I think that there's something that, there's a lot to unpack there. But I will tell you, I'll never use the names of specific retailers, but I was in some retailers, over the weekend, and I'm like, some of them I hadn't been in since before the pandemic. And I'm like, you know what? It looks exactly the same. And this to me, but this goes back to, if the mall is a platform, I think there are services that can be provided to elevate all, to help everyone figure out, right, this, you're only addressing 23% of the US population with the size range you have. And this is where, right, I think moving away from, we don't need to get all the nitty gritty, but moving away from percentage rent, thinking of, this is a service that's being provided to you. It, to me, is, and we've started, some of the REITs that we work with, we're starting to actually implement this. So I know that it's not just kind of a great idea. It's great in practice as well, because I think that there is just a different relationship than between landlord and tenant. And ultimately, retailers will be more successful in this model. It's just a matter of kind of probably rolling it out faster than what we've seen.
Definitely.
So, and to that, it's the idea of the store as the showroom, but you're selling just a wide variety of sizes, via the e-commerce fulfillment. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I know this is an aside, but didn't Old Navy try to offer more sizes in store, and that didn't turn out to be successful?
I think it's about messaging. There's a lot more to just, I can show up and sell, vanilla scented candles, but if everybody wants, kind of snickerdoodle, then it's just not going to work. And so I think that you also have to know your customers, how to message them, and how to kind of be that one-stop shop. And so there, I think, were other challenges that they were facing as well. And it's not like you just turn on the lights and people, we all know that, right? From a retail perspective, you don't just turn on the lights and they show up. You've got to market it. It's how you market it. And I think that, if they were to go back and do it, I think in 23, where they have a different environment, we're having different conversations, I bet they'd be a heck of a lot more successful.
Yeah, that's a great point. All right, so my trend that defined retail in 2022 is really the cause for Ebere's trend, which is inflation. I mean, it's not completely, but I mean, that's really the thing that I've been asked about the most, been asked to talk about the most, to dig in, to predict about the most. And I'm not an economist, so I'm always turning to our chief economist for help in that. But as Ebere said, that's a real driver for not only the growth of, Aldi, Dollar General, Burlington, TJX, but then also private labels, off the hook. Walmart, some of their private label items are just super popular now, and not just Walmart, but all of the chains that do it. Well, except for Bed Bath & Beyond, that didn't work out very well. But everybody else seems to be doing gangbusters with private label.
I love it, James. Throw those tomatoes.
No, it's not. It's not anything. It just I did as I was saying it, I was like, well, there is one major example that it didn't work.
I have to jump in here because you've actually hit on. So during the pandemic, I don't know about you guys, but my only time out of my house, which it was great to spend so much time with my family and my dogs and my guinea pigs. But I would, every Friday at 3:00, I would go to the grocery store. And I got to tell you, I would dream about going. And I would go to, we, in the town that I was in, our grocery store, bad timing for them, was under renovation. So the closest grocery store was about 20 minutes away, and it was Aldi. And there was also a Walmart. It wasn't a super center. It was a discount store, and there was a Target and a Costco. So James knows me, right? My background is accounting. But I can write numbers to me. I've kind of very easy to remember. And so over, let's say 3 months, right, going every Friday, and I would actually spend about 3 hours there because it was really like my downtime. And so I started to actually do, James, price comparisons. And I actually have tons of spreadsheets, right? Because I was like, I wanted to check it over time. And so every week I would then start to go to all the other grocers, before it got dark, basically. And what I found was not only did all these private label have less sodium and sugar, but the price on like a 5-pound bag of sugar, for example, at Aldi versus a 5-pound bag of sugar at Walmart, which were about 2 minutes away from each other, let's just say it was a factor of about 3. And
Wow.
so I did, let me put it this way. This was like I spent a lot of time on this, but I looked at, I think I tracked about 500 different grocery items, right? Staples. So you're talking like butter, flour, eggs, etc., and even branded where I could. And it was fascinating to see, right, the difference in price, but in private label specifically. And that goes back to, and then also it wasn't just the price, but it was the quality. And so I feel like, right, and Walmart sells a lot more than just grocery items, right? And they're, the majority are branded. And so that is a very interesting kind of place to look and think about. And if you also think about the fact that now Walmart and Kroger and others are being paid by the branded companies to have the product on their shelf and digitally, I just think that we're going to continue to see some really interesting changes in market share, especially in this highly inflationary environment.
Yeah, that's so interesting that you tracked all that stuff. We're about to next month, I think, Ebere release our new grocery report. And I don't think I'm giving anything away by saying Aldi was the #1 grocery expander in the past 12 months with, I think, almost 50 new locations.
Right.
Which is interesting because they announced they were going to do a lot more than that. I think they had trouble. My guess is they had trouble finding the real estate.
Yeah, I think that also too, right? They've changed their real estate strategy, and they realize, I think, that they have permission to, let's just say, expand outside of where they had originally thought they would be opening stores. And I think that, and you can, right, I've actually talked about, this is something I'm just personally fascinated by, as I started off as a grocery analyst, right? And so you look at where Americans were always very focused on branded. I do think the pandemic had a big impact because, if all that was on the shelf was private label mustard, that's what you were buying, right? You didn't really have it. And I actually think that was, right, the big change. Not only we realized the value of the shelf. And so I think in two directions, but I think we also in many cases became much less brand. That's why I think the CPGs, right, are spending so much on marketing and whatnot, because, consumers were like, you know what, if I have the private label mustard or branded, it's okay, right? I'm, especially if I'm saving 50% in a highly inflationary environment, I think that there's a lot there. So yeah, I think the Aldi news, and I would expect them to continue to expand aggressively. And then we'll see, what happens with the Kroger Albertsons merger in terms of, boxes being available, although those are typically bigger than what Aldi opens. But yeah, there'll be market share for grabs for sure.
Yeah, we'll see how that turns out. That's my thing. I'm waiting with bated breath to see what happens. Is will Kroger and Albertsons go through? But that's a topic. I feel like that's a topic for another show. Okay, so there's our top 3 or 4 or 5, I lost track, trends we were watching in 2022. I also sent out a post on LinkedIn and tagged some of our peer retail and real estate researchers from around the country to see what they thought. I got a few comments back. Let's see here. So Clay Hallman, who heads research over at Simon, said for him, it was the resilience of the consumer that was the story for 2022. He said, I kept being pleasantly surprised each month as we'd have positive comps. So yeah, that's a great story. Another one, Garrick Brown, said for him, it was Barnes & Noble announcing they're back in store growth mode because it was emblematic of that bigger trend, which is the stabilization of most retail categories after nearly 20 years of e-commerce disruption. So bookstore category has reached a new normal, I guess.
That's
I
really,
have to,
James. Oh, sorry. Go
I
ahead,
have to
Deb.
share with you, James. Last night, I just needed to kind of, have a quiet place to think. So I like packed up the whole family and we went, across the park to Barnes and Noble and just, got our cups of coffee and a snack and worked. And I got to tell you, it was packed. We stayed shorter because I felt guilty, like holding up the seats, even though I was like, just get another cup of coffee or tea, right? But it was unbelievable. This kind of, I think, hey, we're seeing at the malls, right? There's excitement to be back in person. And so I think that impacts all of retail, right? Nobody in a good way is exempt from that. And, offering that, kind of what Barnes and Noble gives us, right, is there's that comfort, right? We've all been there at some point. Well, most of us at some point in our lives. And then going back and having that nostalgia, I think, is something that also we're seeing is very important for the consumer right now.
Yeah, I agree. And Barnes is moving away from, the supermarket of books format to much more like an independent bookstore, actually. More of the layout is more of, I don't want to say labyrinth like, but it's more like a discovery mode. Like you're not going to go there expecting every book. That's what Amazon is for. Now you're going there for this curation and the experience. It's awesome. So let's get into it. We're going to highlight 5 trends we're watching in 2023. Deb, I've asked you for 2, Ebere for 1, and I'm going to bring 2 myself. So let's get into it. Deb, what's your first trend you're watching for 2023?
Yeah, so I'm going to focus on sustainability because I feel it's interesting, actually, specifically in the real estate world. I was asked at ICSC this year from almost everybody I met with, how do we measure it? How do we communicate it? How do we talk to our retailers about it? And while I think there's been a lot of conversation around this topic to the point of ad nauseum, we still don't have, right, a universal way to measure what we're doing, to measure the impact. And, I think if we aren't careful, this idea of greenwashing is going to become much bigger. And how do we start to think about, so this is fascinating, James. For example, Alibaba now, when you check out, the carbon footprint of what you're purchasing. And what we've actually seen is that consumers change right before they hit, buy, they change what's in their basket to have a lower carbon footprint. So the technology does exist, right? It's just a matter of kind of having everybody hop on board. I feel like so the trend will be to figure out how to measure and to communicate the impact that retailers are having. Because I will say, I'm going to get on my soapbox for a minute. The idea that so many are saying, right, we have to pay all this money to be more sustainable is, to me, the antithesis of sustainability, because it's about using less resources.
Yeah.
So I think that every retailer should jump in, right, like up to their waist, because they're like, wow, we're going to save money by being more sustainable. We're going to use less resources. We're going to, kind of be more aware of people's mental health and physical health. And with all of that, they're going to be more productive. And so I feel like, and it's been fascinating going back to, James, you mentioned some of the boards I'm on, how they have really actually helped me frame kind of my point of view, because they've taken it very seriously. And, in 23, everyone, right, is also going to have to report, right, this new SEC requirement. So there is a higher purpose, if you will, that I think everyone's looking at. But this idea that we start to have a number, we can measure companies against each other. We as consumers can decide to shop from A versus B because, their approach to sustainability is more consistent with our own. But I think ultimately the idea is that we use less and that companies are more profitable because they are focusing on sustainability.
So are they, I didn't know the details of this. Are they required to report, public companies, their carbon footprint? Is that what it is?
So the requirements at this point are fairly light, right? And because everyone measures it, this goes back to the challenge, everyone measures it differently. That is part of, this is why, and it's very hard for consumers, right? Because it goes back to, how do we know? And what I find, actually, and you guys as researchers, probably the same thing, those companies that are actually doing the most are saying the least.
Interesting.
Right. And so, and I have to say, there are also a lot of REITs that I think are doing much more than what consumers would expect them to be doing. And so I always feel like our industry, we just don't beat our chest enough about what we're doing around philanthropy and I think around sustainability. And to me, that's the opportunity in 23 is not to be quiet, right? To speak up, to tell people like the great things that we're doing. Yes, when something doesn't go well, we need to have a mea culpa and handle that appropriately. But let's at least tell people what we're doing that's well. And I think it can change the face of business for many. And I'm sure for JLL, it's a huge opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's something that everybody's thinking and talking about. And it's interesting. I like the idea. I think back to when they started putting calories on menus, those mandates started coming out. And some people, it really changed behavior. For me, I was like, I can't see it. You just ignore the but that's something different than this. This is carbon footprint is something I care about,
Right.
Right.
Awesome. All right. Ebere, what's your trend for 2023 that you are watching?
For sure. So for me, the trend that I'm most interested to see is going to be the hyper localization of retail experiences across the country. So I think one of the other major trends that we saw coming out of 2022 was the way that retailers that were located proximal to residential populations, whether that's within urban areas or urban versus suburban, we saw the foot traffic recover a lot faster than places that were dependent on office workers and tourists. And we overall just saw retail rent growth in those areas increase at a much faster rate than in those dense urban areas. So, while we're still waiting for the return of international tourism, at this point, I think it's probably prudent for most retailers to not continue to wait and to instead, figure out a way to make up the revenue that they were making back in 2019 or get back towards those levels in some other way. And I think deepening their presence in these neighborhoods that they pop up in and really making sure that they cater to the consumers in those areas is going to be how they make that money back up, because I think we've already started to see it. And the more that time goes on, we see these stores like James, for example, the Showfields in Brooklyn had a lot of aspects to it that were unique to Brooklyn and that catered to the Brooklyn, the products that they had there catered to the, Brooklyn consumer base. And I think I think that is going to be the way to go going forward, right? As we, continue to heighten the emphasis on in-store experience, it's no longer enough to just offer, a bottle of water or some champagne when they walk in, right? It's what's really going to stick in consumers' minds and make them think of the store as a place that they want to return to and to purchase products from is going to be the unique experience that they get there. And localizing it to the area of the country that they're in is the most logical way to do so. So I think we're going to see a lot of that with all these new stores that are going to be opening. I'm expecting, I'm in New York, obviously, so maybe some, Timberland boots. I don't know. I'm trying to think of what's like unique to New York, but I think we're going to see a lot more activations and things like that catering to those local populations.
Well, it's interesting, Barry. The data shows that only 4% of the store needs to be localized for the consumer to think they're local. And so
That's awesome.
It actually isn't that many SKUs, but the challenges, which I think Costco actually, of any retailer I know, I think they actually do it the best on a national scale, right? Because they have different mayonnaise in different locations based on, right, different bread, right? And right. Those are the things, but that's what the consumer notices. And so I actually did a marketing case on this because I was so fascinated by, right, why does a store, and granted, right, they have less than 5,000 SKUs, so 1 or 2 SKUs does make a difference. Sure. But it is something for retailers to think about. It doesn't take that much. But, you think about some of the food, right? I'm in New York as well, right? Some of the food that's, very local. And, right, also how more restaurants, this is the thing. It's not, I guess it's a trend, but I'm not going to use it as mine, but, how restaurants, right, are starting to do more of their own product. Sure. Right. If you start to see that in local retail, that would make a difference for you and me, right, in the New York area. So I think that I actually think this is not talked about nearly enough. And everyone is like, oh, it's just too hard. We're not going to do it. But I think that actually, your discussion around the consumer and whatnot, and where we are in tourism. But the thing is too, when tourism, kind of returns, they want to have that local experience. So I think it's just a win-win.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. Oh man, I was just thinking about examples of localization. The best one is the Walgreens on the Las Vegas Strip, where like half the store is liquor. They really localize that store.
That's what the
They
market's
have like a
asking for.
beer cave. There's a great wine selection, liquor. You gotta know your market.
Exactly.
Okay, so my pick for trend that I'm watching in 2023 is the AI machine learning explosion. And I don't think I'm going out on a limb here. I mean, this is something that we've really been talking about a lot. But for me, the quality with like DALL-E and Chat GPT, which just came out, it's been blowing me away. I think it's going to be a new creativity for retail on the consumer side and new efficiencies on the back end. And I just did this morning. Let me share this with you guys, what I did in like 5 minutes this morning on my computer.
Isn't it?
Okay, so here, I'm going to pull this up on the screen. So I asked it, what are the top 5 trends affecting retail? And write your response as a rhyming poem. It created this entire poem in 3 seconds. And I'm not going to read it all aloud, but e-commerce has changed the game, allowing consumers to shop from home with no shame. Experiential retail is on the rise with interactive and immersive events to consumers' surprise. This is like
Wow.
amazing. So then my part 2 of this is I described a 12-year-old who likes music and volleyball and TikTok that lives in New York. And I said, describe some holiday gifts for her. And it said, it had a couple of things here that you can see. And one of them was a new pair of volleyball shoes. So then I went over to DALL-E 2 and I said, generate some images of volleyball shoes inspired by a love of music and TikTok. It chose these 4. And I said, okay, I like the third in from the left, the best. Give me more variations on that. Seconds later, I had these new variations. So like, these are like, I'm not that smart about fashion, but if you came to me with a pair of these shoes and said, hey, these are the hip new shoes that some famous designer came up with, I would be like, oh, cool. I would totally believe that. So I'm just blown away by the capability of machine learning and AI. And it's still not quite as good as human creativity. And it's still a little generic, and you read like what Chat GPT writes, and it's a little bit, I guess generic would be the right word, but it's amazing how polished it is. So anyway, I don't know. That's my trend. That's my trend I'm going to be watching for 2023.
But don't you start to think about your own role and how that changes if somebody can get 90% of it through Chat GPT?
Yes.
All of us, I mean, I actually think it raises the bar. I mean, specifically, I mean, this is one of the things I thought that we would see it happen, more in the future. It's something I've thought about extensively because I'm like, if you already have kind of a ground base of knowledge, then for those of us on the research side, right, we're going to have to up our game in terms of, right. Yeah. So you'll already I think it'll be more about going back to actually Ebere. It's going to be about personalization, right? This same thing as hyperlocalization, right?
Of course.
We're going to have to take this that's a little bit more bland and personalize it. But so much of the work is done. And that I think is, it's terrifying in some ways and it's fascinating in others.
Yeah, I mean, I had in my notes, it's sort of is forcing me to re-examine not only like what is my value, but like what does it mean to be a human? If they're producing such good stuff. But anyway, just thinking more about that, the Chat GPT is really good at one of the things I asked it was to give me a write-up on the New York retail real estate market, and it was very well written. It was pretty vague. It's the quality that I would expect from like an entry-level analyst, somebody just out of college, which is amazing, right? But it still means it just raises the bar for us. Like, we have to be like, our value now is not on how well we write generic descriptions of things. It's really who we can call to find out the inside information, how we can be creative and take two crazy things and put them together in a way that a computer would never think of. It's just going to force us, Deb, to your point, to just do more, right?
Yeah, I actually think so. It's interesting. So we're spending, and I can tie this in theoretically with my, my second trend is we're spending a lot more time in the world of healthcare now, because we believe that there'll be a lot more healthcare actually delivered at retail and malls, right? Because if you think about it, right, it's anxiety producing to go get an MRI. It's not anxiety producing to go to the mall, right? Mall drives oodles of happiness. And so if the MRI just happens to, and this is like real, like this is not theoretical, this is actually happening. So if you start to think about what that means, and, we've also seen some very, drastic changes in our healthcare system, but maybe it's more wellness, but if we start to see some of these changes around wellness and what that means, but then also do we start to question, right? Why, when I go to the grocery store, why are they not helping me make, Ebere, you're going to like just be the poster child for this whole thing. Is like, why are they not localizing? They know me. They know me when I walk in, right? They're like right? I'm pinging them. And so why am I not, if I opt in, why can't I get more kind of tailored messages? Put down that bacon, right? It's not good for you. Pick up the tomato instead, right? That I think we're just going to elevate all of our expectations around personalized messaging at like the right time. Because if you think about it, so many messages, like when you're shopping on an e-commerce website, if you go to a store and they keep saying, hey, sale on aisle 10, hey, sale on aisle 10, hey, sale, that's not okay. But that's what happens when you're on, right, your e-commerce journey, right? They say the messages at the wrong time and at the wrong place. Right. So I think that all of this gets very much elevated. I do think it's we're working with a company called Persado that does generative AI, right? This whole idea of like the right message at the right time at the right place. It's very difficult to do, right? Because we've not really seen it in that many cases. But I just wanted to kind of fold that in there, because I do think wellness is going to be something that is, increasingly important. And once again, we can put that under the sustainability umbrella. I will say from a trend perspective, I've been disappointed that we haven't seen supply chain. I mean, it was sexy for like 2 minutes and I was like, ooh, I'm cool now, right? Like, to be fair, my background, right? I used to run the think tank for Li and Feng. So, right, I was a supply chain, well, still I'm a supply chain expert, but like, I was like cool for like 2 minutes. And then, right, the minute that physical retail opened back up, it's like everybody just dropped this conversation, which I found to be, I was gobsmacked. There's no other way, because I'm like, it is literally the most important piece of your business, right? Because if you can go, we're still on average, guys, right, in non-food, it is 47 weeks from concept to consumer. It's a long, it's actually just to the shelf. Whether the consumer buys it or not, right? It could take, who knows? It could take another 47 weeks depending. But that, to me, if you think about going back, to so many things we've talked about, the inefficiency around that, the cost to hold the inventory, right now, right, we're seeing people who are doing pack away for holiday 23 because they ordered too much. If they could have ordered 12 weeks out, 8 weeks out, like we're seeing like a Shein do, right, then they can make better decisions because they don't need, 52 weeks or whatever of lead time. So I believe that we are going to have a reckoning, and that retailers are going to realize the importance of this. And actually it goes under the sustainability umbrella as well, because, right, if you're ordering too much, 40% of all food grown ends up in landfill. And if we were actually able to solve for half of that, we could solve world hunger. So you start to think about it from that perspective, and you then think about reducing waste in other areas. There is so much that could be solved, right, from a supply chain perspective to impact sustainability and profitability. So I feel like 23 is going to be a more challenging year. When things are more challenging, people are looking for pockets of money. And the easiest one to me is going to be rethinking supply chain, not in a drastic way, because that could be expensive, but at least starting to make some, let's say, baby steps forward. And if the industry can work together, I think that a lot can be solved.
It's so interesting. I never thought about this, but in a way, world hunger is really just a logistics and supply chain problem. It's getting the right resources to the right place. Fascinating. You're blowing my mind, Deb.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay, so one more trend, so we can get to number 5 that we're watching for 2023. I am watching 2 metrics very closely. One is office occupancy, how much people are going to the office. What is that new normal? Because it's not what it used to be. Right now, it's around the holidays, it's lower, but it was up to about 50% average and that's percentage of people that were in the office in 2019. So who knows what that will be. And then the other thing I'm really watching closely is international tourism levels, and what those are going to look like. Deb, you are very connected with Asia. Do you have a sense of when the return of like the Chinese tourist, if that's going to happen?
Yeah, I think we're already starting to see with things, kind of opening up, that consumer is, kind of chomping at the bit to travel. And I think we're going to, I think we are going to see that kind of open back up, probably at a measured pace. But I think also too, right, it's just a matter of kind of the world traveling again. And so I think that, and it's interesting, I thought you were going to hit on the business travel versus personal, because I still think that also is, kind of probably as off kilter as, return to office. And that is also, so I'm attending CES. I can't believe it's like just in a few days. I fly out Monday, and the amount of people who I'm speaking, the amount of people who are dropping like flies is really quite interesting. So I've asked a bunch of people, right? And everyone's like, oh, this always happens. I'm like, no, it doesn't. It does. And everyone has a family emergency. So I think that, you start to think about, right, well, I haven't been in person at CES, which is, they're estimating about 100,000 people. That's a lot of people, right? And so if you haven't been at something that big, you've been able to stay as ahead of the curve. And, and you think about the time and the resources utilized. I just think that I feel like when you go to a conference, right, people show up and they're engaged and they're active. But I think that everyone is reevaluating how many to go to, where to go. And then also, even like for myself this year, I'm like, I want to know exactly what I'm getting out of each and every day. Can I make the trip shorter? Right. Yeah. Because now it's been great. I've gotten to spend so much time with my family. Right. It's one extra day at the conference to see one thing. I could have spent it at home. And so I just think that there is, hey, when we do this again, all three of us in like 15 years, and we look back, right? Because then we'll actually have data around the impact of all this, because I don't think that we're, I think that there is the expectation in many cases that, companies are virtual first, but I just don't think that that's working for everybody either, James.
No. And there is a perfect balance that I've still yet to achieve. 2020 for me really sucked. I did not like not seeing people in person. But then most recently, kind of in the past 6 months, I've been traveling so much that I'm just exhausted all the time, which also isn't great. It was better than 2020, but there's a happy medium there that I'm really looking for.
Yeah, I have to say I did the same thing. And, because it's like, 22 is really when things, kind of, let's say March-ish, right? Really opened up.
Yeah.
And so it's like, oh, there's a conference in like Timbuktu, I'm going, right?
Right.
and I think there was this, kind of this hamster wheel that we were on. And I couldn't agree with you more. I myself am now like, where did I find value? Where did people get value from me being there? And, like, let's take a step back, because if you're just going back to back to back, it's not only hard to recover physically and mentally, but also to really then digest what you learned. And that, I think, that's the purpose of a lot of us being together in those. And I love it because, James, you and I, it's like, we like to kind of test, right? You come up with a thesis, sounds good in your head, but you need to talk to somebody about it. And it's just,
oh my gosh, yeah,
different, because there's, like, I call it the whole, like, Zoom politeness, right? I may like kind of gabosh your idea in person. I would never do that, right? It's very interesting that we all hold back a bit in this type of format.
The thesis is only truly tested in a bar after, at the end of a day. Like, we were at a happy hour together at the Pendry Hotel. I tested a lot of theses there.
Oh my, that was like, I have to say, those are it's funny you say that. Some of the best conversations I've had this year were had that night, because when you get folks from a real estate and retail and tech background, you can cover every topic, right? Nothing is like off limits. And the depth of knowledge that we all had, it was really, truly phenomenal. I mean, it was funny. I was starting to go through and I'm like, okay, we already wrote our report on our predictions for 23, but maybe if I had this conversation earlier, I would have changed that, right? I mean, that's the power of those conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we're running out of time, but we have one last question. I want to hear everybody's favorite retail visit that they did in 2022. I'll kick it off. I've got one retail, one F&B. For me, retail, I just love going to the Harry Potter New York store. Ebere and I went earlier this year and just had a lot of fun. Great theming. Everybody already knows about it. It's great. And then my food one is the potluck food hall at the Rosedale Mall in outside of Minneapolis. It's a great food hall. We manage it. So when I went, we did this challenge where we had to eat food from every single vendor in the food hall, which I almost exploded from, but it was super fun. And it's a lot of local vendors. It is not a food court. It is all local vendors. So very cool. Ebere, what was your retail visit for 2022?
I have to say that this might be, so my favorite retail visit in 2022 was actually to the American Dream Mall, James.
Really?
You and I went together.
Oh my gosh, I was going to say that too.
Were you really? Great minds, Deb. Great minds. Honestly, for me, it's because it's just something that I'd heard about. We've all heard about it happening for so long and it being built, and there were so many delays. And so once it was finally open and we were able to go visit, and finally getting to go visit it this year, what I love the most about real estate is the fact that the things that we talk about and research are also happening in the real world, right? We can go and see them. So it really closed a mental loop for me to actually step foot in the American Dream Mall that I kept hearing about for so long. So that was honestly my favorite visit this year.
And I just saw a video on LinkedIn. I forget who, I think it was a Garmesian, posted video from, it must have been around the holidays, and it was just jam packed, like tons of people. So it's great to see that they're getting some traffic.
Absolutely.
So Deb, what was your favorite retail visit of the year?
I mean, it was American Dream because, you could go there. I brought the whole family, everyone, right? Like, we all kind of scattered, right? And it was, let's meet up here at this restaurant, right? Like, let's all grab something to eat together. So you could bring everybody back. But everyone just had like the best time. And, and then you could kind of come together and share your experiences. Like, where did you go? Where did you go?
Yeah.
And then I think having kind of the kind of whole, Nickelodeon aspect. I mean, there's just so much to do. It was so funny. We were like, oh my gosh, when can we go back? And you think about it, and as we're going into a more challenging macro environment, right? What that does too is that, it is accessible by many. And so even if, you're feeling that your purse strings are a little bit tighter, right? You can go and walk the mall, right? You've got to eat anyways. You can grab a sandwich and split it type of thing. But I think that was actually what was in the back of my mind too, is that they've made it incredibly accessible. And so I think there's something to be said about that for, and you're really kind of appealing to like the tri-state area in terms of where they are located. And I think they've got, it's just fun. It's like going to, Disneyland, Disney World without actually having to leave, right? I mean, it's really fun. You have that same belief. And I believe me, I've been to Disney World a lot. It's that same kind of like you suspend reality. And, if they were to sell American Dream tchotchkes, I think they would do quite well, because you're there and you're like, oh, right. Like I want to buy more into this. And so I will share with you my F&B. I, on Black Friday, start off at 5 a.m. I was in Providence, Rhode Island, in which, that merges into kind of Massachusetts, with 3 steps. And so spent my Black Friday from 5 a.m. till 5 p.m. between Massachusetts and Rhode Island. And, needed to grab a bite to eat, and, wanted to just kind of sit down and restore. So I found, I literally just like looked it up on, let's just say one of the places that recommends restaurants to eat. And I ended up walking in. It was literally the most amazing. It was called Vinny's, a 65-year-old restaurant. And Vinny himself was still there.
Great.
Wow.
Told me all about, but I learned so much. He was talking about how challenging it is to find labor right now, how he's like 83 and he's still working. He said, kind of 5 days a week. He said it like 12 hours a day, and just some of the challenges he's facing and how he was looking. And I was like, it was just a step back in time. And also it really reminded me of like why we do our jobs. It's like that personal connection with consumers and hearing their stories. And so it was, and the food was great and it was easy. And I mean, I literally took something and like, because I had to like run to my next store, but it was one of those things that it's nice when someone can have that impact on you, to take a step back and reflect and think about what matters. And Vinny absolutely did that. So it was great on many levels. Great food, great conversation, and an opportunity to reflect.
That's fantastic. All right. I was just thinking about last time I was in LA, I went to Cantor's Deli, which feels like 1,000,000 years old, and it feels like it's been there forever, and just a very similar experience to that. I love places like that. So Deb, folks want to learn more about you. Where do they go? Coresight's website, or what do you think?
Coresight.com, Coresight.com. There is a lot of content that is free and easily accessible. We do have a lot of other, very deep dives. And one of the biggest changes we're making, James, in the year ahead, it's interesting around the kind of conversation we had on AI and ML, is we're going to start to publish very, kind of 50+ page books, if you will, on sectors, so that, right, if you are going to be studying, let's say, the home improvement sector, right, you've got to read this. And so the idea is that we already have, right, as you know, we've got like literally probably, I think it's like 12,000 pieces of content on our website. But if we can start to pull out, right, if you are covering home improvement, what is it that you exactly need to know? And, where's all the history and whatnot? And so I think we're somewhere between like, I should do a poll on this, Coresight, kind of collation or compendium or catalog, right? Like everyone wants the alliteration, but that is one of the biggest changes we're making in the year ahead. And, I'm excited because, we all, at the end of the day, it's more important than ever to be an expert and to add value to those around you. So at least this is one of the things we're changing, and I'm excited to be able to do it.
That sounds awesome. And I can't wait to check that out. So Deb, thank you so much for joining us today. And we'll talk again very soon, I'm sure. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Take care. Thanks, Ebere. Thanks, James. This was great.
Bye, Deb.
Bye-bye. And for all our viewers out there, if you want to check out our research reports, you can head on over to jll.com, go to the Trends and Insights section, and download to your heart's content. We also do a weekly audio podcast called Where We Buy. New episode just came out today talking about the Puerto Rico retail market. Very interesting. I didn't know a ton about it, but I learned as a part of this podcast. Very cool. And that's over at wherewebuy.show.
Absolutely. And if you enjoyed this show, please be sure to hit the subscribe button on YouTube, and also click on the bell icon so that you're notified every time there's a new show. You don't even have to look for it yourself. And alternatively, you can follow the JLL retail page on LinkedIn.
Awesome. So what did we learn about retail today, Ebere?
James, I learned that it takes 47 weeks to go from concept to the store shelf.
And I learned that you only need to change 4% of inventory to make a store localized. That blew my mind.
Truly.
And if all of you want to know more of everything we know about retail, you can join us here again next time.